Tarantino is kind of the opposite of the platonic ideal of a director to talk about for this series. His films themselves are ubiquitous and fairly popular, especially among the type of people who watch video essays, and especially anything you might think could be said about him has already been talked about to death by his most ardent fans, studious critics, and detractors. He constantly pays homage to the grindhouse B-movies he grew up with. He has a habit of using non-linear storytelling to tremendous effect. His dialogue is impeccable, feeling both unreal and like a natural conversation simultaneously, and his love for cinematic violence is only paralleled by his love for pop music, women's feet, and empowering traditionally disempowered characters. But, oddly enough, there is almost always a significant oversight in discussions of his early work. Only Tarantino's first two films, Reservoir Dogs and Pulp Fiction, ever really get any attention, and when they're talked about, it's only those surface-level features of his work that get discussed. Everybody always talks about the non-linearity and dialogue of Pulp Fiction, and never the themes themselves the film is trying to get across, and yes, that's a piece for another day. But even more tragically, no one ever talks about the best of Tarantino's first three films, Jackie Brown. And yeah, it's not hard to see why Tarantino's film about being a black woman in America and the misogyny that entails isn't talked about. It's racism. That Jackie Brown is so underdiscussed in most film circles is a damn shame though, because it's a legitimately subdued take of the complex intersectional power dynamics that come about due to race and gender in America. Now, whether or not such a story was Tarantino's to tell is a question I'm not qualified to answer. I'm way more interested in what Jackie Brown actually says on its own though, because its theming and character work are immaculate, and it is unquestionably a goddamn masterpiece in my mind. It's also Tarantino's most positive and least cynical film, given that its story is about a black woman maneuvering around the men in her life that would simply use her to their own ends, and eventually escaping to a life of freedom. We follow Jackie Brown, played masterfully by Pam Grier, and meet her first as she is arrested by the FBI and the ATF for smuggling $50,000 into the United States for her boss, Ordell Robbie, who's played by Samuel L. Jackson. Ordell is a black market gun runner, and, to quote the most insightful character in the film, a complete fuck-up. Over the course of the film, Jackie makes a deal with the ATF to try and pull a sting on Ordell, while simultaneously working with Max Sherry, a bail bondsman played by Robert Forster, to both keep all of Ordell's money for herself after he is arrested. Structurally, this is a fairly typical heist film, and that simple structure keeps the story grounded, so that the film can spend the majority of its 2.5-hour runtime focusing on exploring its many well-drawn characters and the complex power dynamics between them. We see the film's themes explored and how these power dynamics inform the characters' relationships to each other, and it starts with Jackie being subjected to the machismo and posturing of the FBI and ATF agents Ray Nicolette and Mark Dargis, played by Michael Keaton and Michael Bowen, who she is arrested by and coerced to work with in order to take down Ordell. Jackie, who by virtue of being a black woman has been surrounded by this kind of machismo and posturing her entire life, approaches it with a level of caution, always navigating the fragile male egos surrounding her deftly and escaping it unharmed.
You got any reason to be nervous around me? Is that what I think it is?
What do you think it is?
I think it's a gun pressed up against my dick.
Well, you thought right. Now take your hands from around my throat, nigga.
After Ordell bails Jackie out of jail, she quietly steals a gun and pulls it on Ordell, gaining the upper hand on him as well as his respect, which she uses to convince him that she hasn't ratted him out to the FBI or ATF. And they start to formulate a plan together to bring all of Ordell's money up from LA to Mexico. Jackie's approach to Ray and Mark's machismo is similarly deft, but far more careful, as she buddies up with the two of them to gain their trust, playing up her own vulnerability in order to convince them to work with her. As cops, these two hold far more power over her than Ordell ever could, and their white privilege makes them feel and act superior to her in subtle ways, making her decision to play damsel a wise one, as it eventually leads to them underestimating her. The only character besides Jackie that comes away unscathed by machismo and toxic masculinity is Max Sherry, who from the beginning shows the utmost respect for Jackie in a way no other character does, and by the end of the film admits to being a little scared of her, even as he's earned her respect and a bit of her affection. Max is also easily the most charming male character in this film. He gets a lot of mileage out of his simple displays of respect for Jackie, but he is also able to effortlessly compliment her in such a way that subtly reveals the awe he holds her in.
Max, how do you feel about getting old?
You're not old. You look great.
No, I'm asking you, how do you feel about getting old? I mean, doesn't it bother you?
It's not really something I think about.
Max is also the film's deuteragonist, and we as audience join Max in looking at Jackie through that same lens of awe, sitting back and marveling at her effortless charisma and self-control. This self-control exerted by Jackie is the trait that separates her from every other character, and is ultimately what allows her to come out on top. Ordell and Luis lose their cool fairly easily, and over minor things, costing both of them their lives, and Ray and Mark both come off as too jittery and excited to ever step back and evaluate the situation they're in with Jackie and Ordell, almost like dogs too excited by the prospect of eating their prey to actually catch it. Max is the only character that comes close to Jackie's level of cool, but the awe and humility she makes him feel end up making him feel like he's always one tiny slip up from melting into a bit of a stammering mess. Jackie, though, she retains her composure and never feels overwhelmed by anything going on around her once she starts putting her plan in motion, and even is willing to be forward and confront Ordell when he deviates from their established plan, making Ordell open up to her and be clear about exactly what he's going to do. We also see these films' themes explored through Melanie, played by Bridget Fonda, as we see her relationships to Ordell and Luis. Ordell keeps her around as his blonde surfer girl, and we immediately learn that she is taking advantage of Ordell's simplistic view of her to live a life of leisure, where her only ambition is to get high and watch TV all day. She actively calls out Ordell and his facade as the cool, collected gangster that he tries to project as well. Only a few moments after we hear Ordell bragging to his friend Luis Guerra, played by Robert De Niro, about all the specifics of his gun trade, do we see Melanie completely undercut everything Ordell said.
When them Hong Kong flicks came out, every nigga in the world had to have a 45, and they ain't want one, they want two, cause all them niggas want to be the killer. But what them flicks don't tell you and what they don't know, that a 45 got a serious fucking jamming problem.
Boring, isn't it?
Makes you through once.
Thinks he's Joe Gunn now.
Oh, I'm impressed. He seems to know a lot.
He's just repeating shit he overheard. He ain't any more of a gun expert than I am.
Melanie continues these small little call-outs throughout the film, unwilling to accept anyone's bullshit, to the point that when Luis starts imitating Ordell's machismo later in the film, having been cool and collected until then, she starts to actively mock him, calling him just as much of a fuck-up as she called Ordell. Ultimately, Melanie lacks the same instinct for cautious survival that Jackie has, and antagonizes Luis, leading to an undeserved violent outburst where he shoots her in broad daylight in a shopping mall's parking lot and leaves her for dead. In a lesser film, Melanie's death could feel insidious, but Luis's outburst is built up over the entire time we see him and Melanie together. After spending the better part of a week shacked up with Melanie, spent alternately fucking and getting high with her, Luis is not at the top of his game, and the pressure of running late to an important trade-off with Ordeal is weighing on him. Having come down from his high, though, the mounting pressure of his failures combined with Melanie's complete unwillingness to, for lack of a better phrase, do her feminine duty and provide emotional support, leads Luis to lash out against her violently, in a way that puts Ordell's entire operation at risk, and cements his status as a fuck-up. Luis's need to continually keep up his image as a tough, macho gangster doesn't help anyone either, and eventually leads to his own death, as Ordell kills Luis for his massive fuck-up of, I repeat, killing Melanie in broad daylight in a shopping mall's parking lot.
What the fuck happened to you, man? Your ass used to be beautiful.
There are also a few more direct acknowledgments of the complex power dynamics of race and gender in this film, the most obvious being a mini rant Ordell goes on about how Jackie being caught with a couple ounces of cocaine and undisclosed cash gets her charged with possession with intent to distribute, when white celebrities similarly caught with cocaine are only charged with possession. Most of the themes of this film are driven by the characters' relationships though, and the usual frenetic plotting and fast pace of Tarantino's films take a back seat. Jackie Brown even avoids using non-linearity for the entire film, excluding the heist itself, and it only uses it then to grant us a clear picture of the events each character goes through, showing us the perspectives of Jackie, Luis and Melanie, and Max at one at a time. This simplicity and subsequent focus on character and theme is Jackie Brown's greatest strength as a film. A more complex plot or a less traditional structure would have simply distracted from the complex characters the film is meant to serve as a showcase for, and it speaks to Tarantino's strength as a writer and director that when he wanted to craft a film about celebrating and empowering a black woman character, he ditched his signature frills and slowed things down, taking the time to actively critique the toxic masculinity and machismo posturing of characters that would be far more celebrated if they appeared in his other films. Or, to sum things up and put it a bit more simply, you should watch Jackie Brown.
Yeah. It's funny how money changes situation. Miscommunication lead to complication. My emancipation don't fit your equation. I was on the humble, you on every station. Someone play young Lauren like she done, but remember not to game new under the sun. Everything you did has already been done. I know all the tricks from bricks to Kingston. My ting done major, king done one run. Now understand El Boogie not violent, but if a thing test me, run for me gun. Can't take a threat to me newborn son. Help in this way since creation. A group